Now I want to get your opinion on Kissinger's visit on July 20th, because this comes around the same after these visits. I think Kerry was the last one. John Kerry, climate envoy. He went to China, met with some officials. Uh, uh, then Yellen before him and Blinken before her. So you had this kind of uh, almost like a ring around the rosy carousel kind of thing. And even I was listening to some Chinese English language media in the CGTN, and they were talking about how there's some murmurs that China feels like this could be the United States just getting this over with, like just getting over the talking, because there's going to be maybe heavier storms coming in terms of worsening relations soon enough. And they are looking, as you said, Scott, to the elections, to the 24 elections, knowing that both parties tend to jockey and compete, at least in recent years, on who can be more anti-China. So Kissinger's visit comes amid all of this, and I'm wondering your take on it, given that, he's 100. He's been to China more than 100 times, and he's someone that anyone from your experience within the military apparatus to your experience understanding U.S. foreign policy, I mean, he's a giant figure. So what's your take on his visit? He met with everyone from Wang Yi, Xi Jinping, and it kind of came and went, but the significance has not been spoken about so much. So your take?
Well, this is where you get in trouble sometimes, because he's a controversial figure, and the moment you say Henry Kissinger, a large percentage of the audience is, he's a war criminal, he's this, he's that. Maybe, but he's Henry Kissinger. All right, and that's what we're talking about right now. Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State, former National Security Advisor. For a while, he was the United States. He during the Watergate period, and when Ford came in, Kissinger was the man who was calling the shots, for better or for worse. He knows the game better than just about anybody, because he wrote the game, he defined the game. His book, Diplomacy, is considered to be a master work. He's 100 years old who still writes. How many 100-year-olds still write op-ed pieces that the whole world, when it's published, the whole world reads it and goes, we're leaning on every word? None. Only Henry Kissinger. He's been doing this consistently throughout. There's that old commercial, when E.F. Hutton speaks, everybody listens, and when Henry Kissinger speaks, everybody listens, especially on China. Why? Because Kissinger made Nixon Goes to China possible. Before Nixon went to China, Kissinger went to China. And Kissinger is the guy who did all the back, scenes meeting, the back channel work. He got it done. And the Chinese trust Henry Kissinger. The Chinese like Henry Kissinger. The Chinese respect Henry Kissinger. So that we have to set up right off the bat. Whatever you feel as American about Henry Kissinger just doesn't matter, because he went to China. So what we're talking about is, what do the Chinese expect? What do they feel? Was this simply a the old friend coming home to die kind of thing? We're gonna hobble him around and all this stuff? No. First of all, Henry Kissinger doesn't do that, and I don't think the Chinese do that. I think to get a 100-year-old man to fly to China, Danny, you just flew to China. Okay, it ain't easy, is it?
That's brutal.
That's one hell of a
flying straight in probably a private jet or whatever, probably much better, but brutal. Anyway, continue.
No. I when I was a weapons inspector, I flew from Atlanta, Georgia, to Yokohama, Japan, which ain't quite Beijing, but it was still.
Japan's worst flight. Anyway,
it was a horrible flight. Then I had to fly from there to Ulan-Ude, which is another big flight. And and I was young at that time. I was under 30, and my body just was wrecked. So here's a 100-year-old guy making that trip, and there's people who care about Henry Kissinger, and they don't. You don't want to be the guy responsible for him dying. Here's the other thing you have to know about Henry Kissinger. Kissinger and Associates is one of the more powerful lobbying groups, influence peddling groups. They got their fingers everywhere. So he is a very influential person, not just in China but everywhere. Henry Kissinger is the kind of guy that every president, when they come into office, talks to Henry Kissinger. If Henry Kissinger wants to call you, you take that call. And when their world's going bad, every president calls Henry Kissinger. It's a statement of fact. It happens. There's not a single president that didn't talk to Henry Kissinger. They do. That's who he is. He's Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger, because he has this group, Kissinger and Associates, that is money making, he can't go off the reservation. He's Mr. Stability. He's Mr. Reliability. He is Mr. Establishment. So I can guarantee you that before connections were made between Kissinger and China, Kissinger was talking to the Biden White House. He was talking to Blinken. He was talking to Sullivan or their deputies if they wanted hands off, because this might have been one of those meetings where the United States wanted to step back and let Kissinger go in and do things. But if you think that Kissinger went to China on his own without any prior coordination with the Biden administration, you don't know anything about how Henry Kissinger or the United States government works. The talking points were worked out in advance. The United States made it clear what they were interested in knowing. You see, Blinken can't have a conversation with the Chinese right now because they hate him. Jake Sullivan can't have a conversation with the Chinese because they hate him. Lloyd Austin can't have a conversation with the Chinese because they just won't talk to him. All right? So the United States is going, we have a lot of questions. We've got a big list of questions. Who will the Chinese talk to? Henry Kissinger. And so Kissinger went in. Now, Kissinger's smart enough to say, I ain't going to talk about this. I ain't going to talk about this. I ain't going to talk about this. They picked sort of the biggest issue topics. Kissinger went in. He's 100 years old, so he can't have marathon meetings. But he went in there and he had a dialogue with the Chinese government that nobody else in the American government today can have. And he gained insights into what the Chinese are thinking, the direction they're going there. And he was able to bring that back to the Biden administration. The Chinese knew fully well what Henry Kissinger was doing. The United States government knew fully well what Henry Kissinger was doing. And all I can say is that 5 years from now, if you and I can have a conversation, and if it's a conversation where we talk about peaceful relations between Taiwan and China, and that the United States and China, while there might be tension there, we haven't gotten into a shooting war, Kissinger will probably be dead, but we should probably say a little prayer of thanks to Henry Kissinger, because what he did is he kept diplomacy alive. He kept diplomacy viable by going over there and engaging in the very kind of conversations that they can't. I had a guy I used to work for named Rolf Akeas. He was a Swedish diplomat. He ran the United Nations Special Commission. Before he did the disarmament of Iraq, he was in Geneva. He was the Swedish ambassador to the disarmament conference in Geneva, Switzerland, with the United Nations. And there was a time when the United States and the Soviet Union just weren't talking at all. And so what he would do is he would hold these lunches, and he would hold a lunch with he'd bring in the Soviet guys, and he'd have a conversation with them. And then he'd bring in the Americans, he'd have a conversation. And in the process, he's getting them to talk indirectly. And then eventually, when both sides realized what was going on, he just invited them both to lunch, and he said, start talking. And that led to arms control. That led to the breakthroughs that led to the INF Treaty, the chemical weapons treaties, all that, because one man facilitated dialogue. That's what Henry Kissinger, I think, is doing, or did, between the United States and China. He facilitated dialogue.
Yeah, and one maybe key point that you mentioned is the maturity of China over this whole period of souring or worsening or downright just a huge dip in relations, dangerous time right now between the U.S. and China, and it falls at the feet of the U.S. to blame. And What's so interesting is when you were talking about people's reactions to Henry Kissinger, him being a war criminal. I mean, Henry Kissinger did participate in some very horrific decisions that the U.S. government made, and it was Vietnam, Chile. We can go down the line, but one thing that's so important right now about this whole question of maturity is that China understands, first of all, it understands history, and it also understands that there are many sides to politics. There are many sides to diplomacy, that it's not just this person is one thing and you need to write them off in order to look good. Now, China's not interested in looking good. China's interested in getting something done, which is bringing themselves off of the brink because the US is trying to drag them to the brink of war. And I think that was a pretty stark message that was sent. It was pretty clear. I mean, all of the media, if you read anything out of China coming out of the media from the Kissinger visit, it was all about what is this send? What message does this send? Why, why was this done? It was, and the answers are always very concrete. It's done because this is the model that China wants to put out there. This is how you do it. And we're doing it with someone that, oh, by the way, the entire US foreign policy establishment needs to kiss the feet of, because he essentially is a huge player and made, those horrific decisions also came with all of this diplomatic acumen. And he kind of represents, if there was a golden age of US empire, he certainly represents the golden age of what it means to be, a US foreign policy official who, can work many ends of the political spectrum for the benefit of the United States, regardless of what you think of those interests. That's kind of what he did. And he's doing it again. This time, though, I think what is so interesting about this visit is that unlike in 1972 or 1971, 1972, where China was much weaker, now Kissinger's coming in 100 years old. He's been to China 100 times. All of this stuff has happened. All of the decline in the relationship, the decline of the U.S., this dangerous war. And then Kissinger comes in, and he's coming in outside. I mean, even John Kirby couldn't help himself. I mean, that guy's a rabbit hole. He couldn't help himself. He's like, let me just try to stick it in his eye and call him a private citizen. But at the same time, the fact that Kissinger was going there, I think also represents, and I want your opinion on this, it represents a kind of, it's a desperation that's underlying what's going on with the United States' China policy, that there's all of this hubris and aggression and attempts to build up, but the United States kind of build up to war, but the United States understands that China is very important to the United States, and it doesn't feel like all of the conversations they've been cycling through in this month and a half, 2 months long of let's send somebody to China to talk, have been going very well. And I think if there's anything, now that I've been to China twice, I know that if there's anything that you understand about Chinese people, is that they're no BS. Like, if they're unhappy, you're going to really know about it. They're not going to they're not going to sit and like bow to you. That's when Yellen bowed, it was so awkward, because it's like, no, that's not really what they do. They talk about standing up, and they talk about like, they don't bow to you, they'll respect you. But this is about, I think that this was really about sending a message. And I think that the Chinese side has probably been sending many messages of, we're not happy with the way things are going. You're going to have to really give us something. And the U.S. was incapable of doing it. But I want to know your opinion on that before we close on this.
No, I think you're 100% right. Look, the best thing that came out of the Blinken meeting was, that the United States said there will not be an independent Taiwan. But beyond that, China really doesn't care if the United States says, "Oh, well, our one China policy," because China knows the history of that. China knows what happened the moment we passed it. Reagan went around and Congress passed resolutions that watered it down, and we never were serious about it, and we were always going to try and strip Taiwan away. China knows this. They play a game where they hold us to account for the one China policy, saying this is what you said you were going to do. They know that we're we're not serious about that. The big thing was for to say we're not going to support an independent Taiwan, because that's what China truly cares about. They're used to American publicity. They just don't want it to get to the point where they're suddenly confronted with a fait accompli, where the United States has suddenly positioned itself to where it can actually defend a Taiwan that decides to become independent. That's problematic for the Chinese. So having Blinken say, "Nah, there won't be independent Taiwan," I think that was the big, but it didn't repair any relations. I mean, Blinken was still up there just saying stupidity, and they humiliated him. I mean, from the moment he got off the airplane, we've talked about this, till the moment Z dismissed him after what, 30-minute meeting? Is that how much he gave him? Um, it was a humiliation for Tony Blinken, but he had to go through it. Yellen came. I've never seen such a confused message in my entire life. I don't know what Janet Yellen was trying to do, because in some ways it looked like she was trying to play the tough guy. She was trying to come in and lay some markers down on, how America is not going to tolerate China doing this. What she doesn't realize is the Chinese don't care anymore, I think. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I just think the day and age of China saying, well, we're concerned about how the Americans, they don't care. They simply don't care. America is a pain in their Chinese butts. That's about it. But they're not like where to me, I think Joe Biden blew it when he failed to go to the Chinese Olympics, the Winter Olympics. Had Joe Biden gone to the Olympics, we wouldn't be having this conversation about a whole bunch of things, including Ukraine, including Taiwan. Because had he gone to the Olympics and had he met with Xi Jinping in Beijing at a time when China was trying to put the best foot forward, he could have redefined U.S.-Chinese relations. It would have been a masterpiece. You know who would have told him to go to the Beijing Olympics? Henry Kissinger, because Henry Kissinger is that kind of smart. But Biden didn't, and now we have what we have. But Yellen went in there, and what does de-risking mean, Janet? When you say you're going to de-risk, you really mean decoupling. Why don't you just be honest about it? But no, de-risk is somehow it's decoupling for the sensitive souls. Well, the Chinese, as you pointed out, they're not sensitive souls. They don't play that game. They want you to be honest. They want you to be upfront. They demand that right now because they're tired of America's doublespeak. And Janet Yellen's visit was all about doublespeak. Then she turns around and goes to India, saying all the things about how important it is. We don't want to decouple because of disasters. And it goes to India and says, help us decouple from China. And the Indians are like, well, we're not playing that game either. So, between Blinken and Yellen, you're right. There's no dialogue. If the whole purpose was Blinken and Yellen to open up chains of communication with China, they failed because the phones ain't buzzing. I would imagine if you're sitting in the Chinese foreign ministry and their American desk, their guy's not coming into work, making multiple phone calls to his American counterparts like you do when you have a thriving diplomacy. I think he sat there and he's doing what his American counterparts are doing, staring at the screen, reading Twitter or X, whatever we're calling it nowadays. But that's what they're doing. They're not engaged in interaction. It sucks, and that's why Henry Kissinger did what he did. It's the only channel of communication going on right now, besides Burns. But even Burns blew it. I mean, my God, how could you be the master of the back channel? Okay, and he wrote a book. That's sort of his thing, the back channel. And then you turn around and say the dumbest thing you could ever say, which is we're actively rebuilding our human networks in China. And the Chinese are going, why? Why? First of all, we know what you're doing because we've unraveled every network you've ever built. So, yeah, but these are sort of things that we don't talk about. The old Moscow rules, where we have detente taking place at the same time we're recruiting each other's spies. Understanding that's the way the intelligence game is played. That's what the United States should be doing, quietly spying on China, like China quietly spies on us. And then when we catch each other quietly spying, we quietly make it go away and keep everything down here so that diplomats can sit there and lie to each other's face and with a smile. But Burns blew it. I mean, he said that. And again, you know the Chinese better than I do, but I can't imagine the Chinese responded well to that, because that's literally just a thumb in their eye. This is William Burns is going in there having the back channel communications that make up for Blinken's, incompetence and Yellen's incompetence. He's an official American government official that puts him in a separate category than Kissinger, because now he can have official conversations. And then he just sabotages the whole thing by saying what he says. So now literally the only channel they have is the Kissinger channel.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.